Hey there, Killjoys. Bailey here. We don't typically do trigger warnings for the show, but this episode contains discussions of intimate partner violence, including emotional, physical, financial, and sexual abuse. We're talking about patterns of harm, power, and control that may be difficult or activating to hear, especially for those of us with lived experience. So please take care of yourself while you're listening. You can pause, skip, come back later. And if you or someone you know is experiencing intimate partner violence, you're not alone. Support is available. We have resources listed in the show description. And with that, let's get on with the show. Welcome back to Bisexual Killjoy, the place where we know bisexuality isn't a phase, it's a phenomenon. I'm Bailey, and this is...
Jace. In today's episode, the harm in silence and isolation, intimate partner violence. We're deviating a little bit from bell hooks because abuse cannot coexist with love. But, as we will discover, bi+ people are at heightened risk for abuse, especially when it is perpetuated by an intimate partner. And we want to make sure that we look at this issue with our eyes wide open. To do that, we're grateful to have someone who is dedicated to the topic. Katie, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me. I would say I'm thrilled and excited to be here, and parts of me are, but also I know this is going to be a difficult conversation. So trigger warning for the listeners. I know y'all have already received that, but an extra special one for me as well.
In her own words, Katherine Wela Bogen is first a storyteller, second a scholar activist, and third a joyful little freak. Bisexual and Jewish, she grew up in rural New England, a doctoral candidate in clinical psychology studying the intersections of bisexual identity, sexual trauma, sexual functioning, and kink. She has published more than 40 peer-reviewed papers and is the host of the political podcast Humanizer. Bogen's 600,000 plus social media followers will recognize her as K.W.Bogen from her public-facing scholar activism, and Queering Him, the first in the Avra and Kieran trilogy, is Bogen's debut novel. Also, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Yes, we are very excited. I mean, that's a weird thing to be like, we're super excited to talk about intimate partner violence, but it's something that isn't always kind of given the space and attention that it needs to have, especially for bi+ populations. So we are, I guess, honored to take that deep dive into a very important topic of intimate partner violence, which we'll, probably also call IPV throughout this episode. It's not pretty. It's important. We want to destigmatize and learn the science because unfortunately, IPV is a lived reality. But before we really get into it, we're just going to pause real quickly from a word from our sponsors. Hey there, Killjoys. We started a Patreon because we got a podcast, and like every other podcaster our age, gotta have a Patreon to pay our bills. Subscribe now. Get access to extra episodes, Substacks, I think, video content, and more. Okay, love you. Bye.
Are you being for real?
Kinda. We got it all. We have access to our private essays on Substack, as well as audio components with them so you can carry us around and listen to us on the bus. We also have access to our Discord, access to live events, a lot more access to me and Jace, and tell us about your problems and why your boyfriend isn't very good and why you should leave him and how you should date people and how you should make your dinner and all these other things. What other things?
Our very exclusive book club where we actually mail you a book every quarter and we sit down to discuss, sponsored by your favorite professor, Jace.
We'll also send you a handwritten letter. How about that? We'll send you some neat stickers and some other stuff that I find on my travels, because I'm a pack rat, and I'd love to share my bounty with you.
So if you want first dibs on all the new things that are coming up, join us there.
Thanks for supporting Bisexual Killjoy, and back to the show. And we're back. So, Katie, for our listeners who don't know you, can you tell us a little bit about how you found your way into your current work that's looking at intimate partner violence, specializing in sexual violence? I mean, like, what drew you to the work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can give the academic spiel or I can give the personal life spiel, but usually I do both, which is I am a queer kiddo. I came out when I was really, really young. I knew that I was bisexual the moment that a new student at my school walked into my English class, and I had never had a crush before, and she was just the cutest darn thing I've ever seen. I was 12 years old, and I was like, ooh, okay, girls, femme people, and I stopped understanding how to have a body and was fully tongue-tied and very infatuated. And I came out to my dad when I was about 12. My dad's a single father. And I wound up kind of scrapping through small-town queer phobia all through my adolescence. I started multiple gay-straight alliances at multiple schools, dealt with a lot of peer homophobia, and I would say intimate partner difficulty in being with people who were closeted while I was out. That really was just the stuff of my life. And when I started working in sexual and gender-based violence prevention after college, the first job that I had was conducting qualitative interviews of queer women who had experienced some form of intimate partner violence about not only their experience of IPV, but how it impacted their substance use and how it impacted their post-trauma sexual functioning. And so many of these women said, I was always sort of interested in or curious about women, but my perpetrator was a man. After I had this experience, I never wanted to sleep with a man again. And I wound up pursuing relationships with women because it was the only context in which I felt sexually safe. And now I'm having like a secondary adolescence. I'm trying to figure out what to do in these new relationships. And so for so many of the people I was interviewing in this first research experience, their queerness was inherently tied to a sense of safety and inherently tied to a history of violence. And then one of the gaps I found when I was speaking to these survivors was they really had questions about sexual functioning interventions of how do I have good sex after trauma? How do I have good sex with women after trauma perpetrated by men? And so it was really muddy and dense, like this idea of queerness being tied to violence, queer people really being enthusiastic about sexual healing and like narrative formation in a way that facilitated their ability to have healthy post-trauma sexualities. And that was in 2015. And now I've been working in the field for about 11 years, doing different violence prevention interventions and sexual and gender minoritized focused research. And mostly I work with sexual trauma survivors who have some kind of sexual functioning concern. And my research population is a queer population. I work with bi, queer, pan, sort of that bi plus community group. And so I got to bring my lived experience as a bi woman into this work. And I will say I identify as a trauma survivor. I've gotten all of the resources and care that I need to have a joyful post-trauma sexual and intimate life. And so I was able to overlay or superimpose my lived experience of getting care as well onto the experience I was hearing about from research participants. And so it's created this really yummy me-search setting for me to conduct research where I get to acknowledge what I've been through and also know everyone has different experiences. Not everyone's experience is going to map onto each other's. But it's been really neat to see how the tendrils continue to broaden after 11 years in this work of still coming to new understandings of the sorts of things that I have been through, still coming to more nuanced understandings of queerness and bisexuality, and hopefully conducting the kind of feminist science that can really support queer trauma survivors.
Absolutely. I think that what's really cool about me-search and the kind of me-search that you're describing is how rigorous and how intense it can be. I am sure that all of our listeners and us are very familiar with me-search isn't real research under heavy quotes. Mm-hmm. But what we learn in feminist circles and from feminist teachings and theorizings is that me-search is one of the most rigorous practices that you can undertake because you're able to relate more to the multifaceted nature of it. And that means that you're not overlooking key elements that an outside observer might.
Absolutely.
That leads us in really great to our next question about how is it that you believe your bi+ identity has impacted your perspective?
Well, I think for some scholars who wind up in violence prevention or some people who want to be violence prevention oriented therapists and like trauma therapists, the experience is peripheral. It's, I know of other people who have gone through this or I've witnessed it in my community. It's just not the same as having lived experience. And I think one of the things having lived experience really protects you against is trauma pornography. Is like really trying to learn the most horrible things that have happened to people just because you're interested in an interesting story rather than being really dedicated to the alleviation of that suffering. And I also think for people who have been through it themselves, it winds up being something that keeps you in the work. I know a lot of folks enter the field of violence prevention broadly and they wind up burning out in 3 to 5 years because all of a sudden they're put in a cognitive situation where they're thinking about violence, something that is physiologically activating 40 hours a week, that is very, very hard on the body. And a lot of people need to find a reason to stay in a field like this. And if you're a survivor, you sort of already have the reason to stay. I think survivors are uniquely equipped to do this kind of work. And I also think, the more specific your experience gets, the better equipped and positioned you are to do that research with a very realistic lens. I can speak to the experience of bisexual survivors who have had multiple gender partners and disclosed differently than someone who is not bisexual or is not queer or has not had many different gender partners. And so you come into the work with, you're talking about bell hooks at the top of the episode, you come into the work with a wisdom that cannot necessarily be taught, must be experienced. It is experiential wisdom. And I just think that that's really valuable. It's positioned me well to do this work. And I also know there are going to be natural obstacles to studying this, but the obstacles to studying it are nothing compared to the obstacles going through it. I'll give an example of an obstacle just in the last 2 years. I do rigorous feminist science. I applied for an NRSA F31 training grant at my doctoral level, which for listeners who don't know, an F31 is one of the most prestigious training awards you can receive as a doctoral student or candidate. It allows you to be a principal investigator of your own study. It provides you federal funding to pursue rigorous science. I scored very, very well on my first round application, and I was funded on my first round, which is almost unheard of. And I was very, very proud. And then in the first round of Trump DEI funding cuts, the NIH cut my grant.
Yeah.
And it was on bisexual women's alcohol use, post-traumatic stress symptoms, and intimate relationship functioning after disclosures of sexual violence histories to their intimate partners. So it was looking really, really closely at just this relational dyad. What happens to bisexual women if they tell a partner about a sexual violence history? What happens to their symptoms? How does their internalized bi-negativity or bisexual stigma weigh on these processes? I was longitudinally testing a moderated serial mediation. And I wound up having to adapt that NIH grant to a much, much smaller qualitative study. But it feels a lot like a homecoming because the interviews are much like the first ones I ever got to do in this field.
Oh, the funding.
Yep.
Yeah, it's great. The work gets done and, oh man, Bi Plus people operate under the circumstances that they're given and we shine like stars.
We do. We just keep doing the damn thing.
Yep, exactly.
We are resilient, as much as that word frustrates me these days.
Mm-hmm.
To all of our listeners, I promise you we will talk about the numbers and the data. But I guess before we get into all of that, we should really define what intimate partner violence is. How would you define that for our audience, Katie?
Well, intimate partner violence is any form of interpersonal aggression that results in any reasonable person feeling unsafe. And there are many different types of intimate partner violence. So yes, sexual violence, abuse and coercion, but also emotional abuse and psychological control, stalking, financial and economic abuse. If you're interested in a pretty well-rounded view of IPV tactics, you can look up the Duluth Power and Control Wheel, which demonstrates or illustrates how one human being can maintain intimate power and control over another. And I believe the Duluth Power and Control Wheel has also been updated with a queered version based on sort of more recent research, 2017 plus, of the ways that intimate coercion differs for queer people. So, for example, heterosexual people are not likely to experience forms of outing as IPV. You can't really out a straight person as straight, but threats of outing a partner is a common form of intimate partner violence that is directed toward queer people, sometimes by other queer people. And then something to note as well is queer relationships tend to have more bi-directional intimate partner violence. So often when we think about IPV, we think about a single victim and a single perpetrator. We usually imagine, because of patriarchy and heteronormativity, a perpetrator who is a man, a victim who is a woman, and it's always harm going in one way. But in queer relationships, that dynamic is just a lot more complicated. Sorry, that was a much longer definition of IPV than perhaps anticipated.
No, I think it's really important. I hadn't even thought about the fact that it can be perpetuated both ways, like bidirectional, you said?
Yes.
So I do want to talk about the statistics and something you well know in your own work and like papers such as like hashtag maybe he doesn't hit you. There is this notable gap in research about rates of IPV. While 1 in 3 heterosexual women will experience IPV throughout their life, close to 70% of all bi-plus women will be victims in this phenomenon. I guess, what do you think is contributing to this risk? Are there some overlooked factors? Is it the fact that we're queer? Is it the fact that we're less likely to talk about it?
Those are great questions. I'll address the first one first and then the likely to talk about it second. I think what we call double jeopardy in the research is a huge reason that bisexual women in particular are so vulnerable to intimate partner violence. And I will say they're also much vulnerable than their lesbian or heterosexual peers to sexual violence across the lifespan. About half of bisexual women report completed rape in their lifetime, and 3/4 report some form of contact sexual violence. So not necessarily completed PIV rape, but much more likely to experience IPV, much more likely to experience sexual violence and sexualized IPV. And a lot of that has to do with minoritized stress and double jeopardy. Bisexual women are facing stigma from 2 directions at once. We're facing anti-bisexual stigma and homophobia broadly from heterosexual communities. And we're facing anti-bisexual stigma and erasure and sort of minimization of our queer identity from LG, I will say B as well, because bisexual people also perpetrate this against other bisexual people, from LGBTQ communities. So we've got double discrimination, double jeopardy, which results in us experiencing higher minoritized stress. So greater feelings like the burden or stigma of our identity is living in the body, like it's something we carry around. And once you hear over and over and over again over the course of your life from everyone in your community, whether it's straight people or queer people, that there's something wrong with your sexuality, that you're dirty, that you're slutty, that you're, all of the sort of anti-bisexual messaging we get, we start to internalize that. So higher minoritized stress in terms of other people's anti-bisexual attitudes and how they act those out against us, and higher minoritized stress in terms of how we internalize bi negativity and anti-bisexual stigma. We have lower overall levels of community belonging and belongingness. So feeling like we're really attached to a community, really part of a community, have people we can go to, rely upon, and trust, which results in greater social isolation. People can also, in intimate relationships, use our bisexuality in order to socially isolate us. So a bisexual woman dating a man might be told, you're not allowed to have girlfriends because you could wind up hooking up with any of them. Like you can't hang out alone with other girls. And a bisexual woman dating a woman might be told, I don't want you to hang out with men. You're going to cheat on me with them. And that is compounded by the mythology that bisexual people are unable to be monogamous, that we're always cheaters, that we're always poly, that we always have some sort of other interest. No shade to poly people. I love you so much. It's just an anti-bisexual stereotype. So we wind up feeling invisible really in both spaces, and that compounds our vulnerability to IPV.
I do just want to, we also have men and masculine listeners who might be hearing this. They're like, well, what does this have to do with me? And it's like, whoa. So bi-plus women at a really heightened risk for IPV. And then bisexual men, bi-plus men are also like at a very heightened risk for it too. Like according to the LGBTQ plus IPV Institute, they did a report out in 2021. So 56.4% of bi-plus men experience sexual violence in their lifetime. And also bi-plus men in relationships with women report more frequent IPV aggression, actually interpartner aggression, than those in relationships with men. I want to dig at this a little, pick at it a little bit, because I think it has a lot to do with the biphobia and the assumptions from partners being like, you're going to cheat on me or you're going to leave me and you have to stay at home where I can see you at all times. So yeah, just bye guys, we see you. It's bad for you too, honey.
Yeah. And bi folks of all genders, I would say, if you're dating someone who appears to be an opposite gender person, not to use binarist language, I'm using quotes here, you're going to be told, oh, well, you're basically straight. And then if you're dating someone who shares the same gender or expression as you, you're going to be told, oh, you're like correctly gay, but only once you're an adult, because when you're younger, you're going to be told that you're experimenting, confused, broken, sinner, vile, all the stuff that queer youth are told. And so you either get the erasure if you're in a relationship that someone could perceive as straight or is, quote, straight passing. I hate that phrasing, but fine. or you get the entire adolescent trauma of being queer and coming out in a really puritanical, queerphobic society, and then may not feel welcome in any space, really. I mean, you still get minoritized stress, even no matter sort of who you're partnered with.
Precisely. And that kind of minority stress, the way that we internalize it, manifests itself in a lot of really physical ways that we can actually name. It means that these long-term struggles with minority stress also come with struggles with emotional regulation. It's harder to emotionally regulate yourself. It's harder to respond to sticky questions like, aren't you basically straight or aren't you basically gay? When you keep being asked that question 24/7, it is not just annoying, it is a form of violence. And it is hard to actually engage with those skills of emotional regulation when that violence continues over and over again, regardless of the space that you're in.
Mm-hmm.
It also contributes to struggles with mental health. I mean, it's hard to keep a high self-esteem when you're constantly being told that you're not what you are. Like, Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
I have a lot to say on this.
I totally agree with you. And even if you are told that you are what you are, the are that you are is bad. Like, even if people accept that you are bisexual, you still have to deal with all of the negative stereotypes about bisexual people.
That then you have to bat back every single time, or else that's the entryway for people to say, see, I told you. That's just what it is. For all of our listeners who are not watching the video episode, we're all just consistently rolling our eyes the more that we talk about this. It's a little funny. Soon we're going to move the world with our eyes only. But anyway, Katie, how do you think that these struggles with emotional regulation and mental health are over the long term, right?
Mm-hmm.
How did this contribute to IPV rates?
Well, I would say, I think a lot about stress physiology, allostatic load, elevated cortisol. Like if you're in a situation where you have to experience body-based stress, where like your heart is beating faster, you're starting to sweat, you're like uncomfortable, which is the sort of stuff that these repeated conversations about biphobia and anti-bisexuality bring up. Like I know when someone casts bi hate in my direction, my face is red, I'm sweating, like my body is doing something. And then I have to use skills and tools to regulate, which is effortful and laborious. And all of those things contribute to allostatic load or like stress, wear, and tear on the body over a lifespan, which makes people more vulnerable to cancers and heart disease and early death. Like allostatic load is not something to take lightly. And then there's a lot of science too about the impacts of bi-negativity and minoritized stress on symptoms maintaining themselves. Like Jace, as you were saying, that difficulty of regulating when you're being asked to regulate over and over and over again. So not only do we have less community support necessarily when something happens to us, but we're also more likely to experience symptoms like aggravated symptoms afterwards. Bisexual women report more frequent rates of PTSD occurrence after experiences of sexual violence and intimate partner violence. It takes that PTSD longer to resolve. They have more severe symptoms of depression, more severe symptoms of anxiety. They report higher psychological distress. And that is sort of the perfect storm for trying to find other forms of coping. And I'm talking now about substance use. Often, bisexual survivors will cope with these PTSD, depression, anxiety, distress symptoms by trying to avoid the immense pain of not only the experience and how hard it was potentially to get support, but how upset and disturbed it has made them. Like it's difficult to go through partner violence and sexual violence. And so they'll use avoidant coping mechanisms like drinking alcohol, like engaging with cannabis. And yes, those strategies provide short-term relief. That is why people do them. But they also aggravate PTSD symptoms over the long term. They reinforce avoidance. They make it so that folks aren't learning strategies that will be effective over the long term. Like the amount of time they're spending stoned or faded or whatever is also time they could be practicing emotion regulation skills and exercising that skill muscle. And so it's a bit of a loss just based on balance of time. It increases their risk of developing substance misuse problems, which are then difficult to treat. And it increases the vulnerability to re-victimization because if you're not spending your sort of post-trauma recovery time, not only trying to help yourself feel better, but gaining the skills that you need to move more safely through the world, it's not something we should have to do. But all my bi-femmes out there, like you know as well as I do that strategies to keep yourself safe can be effective. If you're not doing that, and instead you're engaging more and more with substances, you're more likely to be recognized by opportunistic perpetrators who can see when someone is struggling, who can see the person who's drunk and faded at that party, who can tell which of their friends is like easy to get alone when she's drunk or whatever. You become sort of like a target for these really opportunistic perpetrators. And I will say, and I always say this, violence does not happen in the absence of a perpetrator. It is always someone else's decision. I'm not trying to victim blame here with the, coping via substance use. And often that time could be better used learning other skills and strategies.
As we're talking about this, something that keeps coming to mind is that IPV presents, as you've said, prevents differently in heterosexual contexts from gay contexts. And even more so in bi plus people who experience IPV. We experience it in a very particular way that isn't as easily identified. So, we are talking about sexual violence. We're talking about physical violence, which is why I'm so devastated that bi plus research funding is getting pulled because we need bi plus specific so desperately. Mm-hmm. But nearly half of bi plus people report financial and emotional abuse. Mm-hmm. I think this is something that's very nuanced. It's behind closed doors. People don't talk about it or they don't recognize it. But what are some early warning signs that emotional and financial abuse are happening behind closed doors?
I mean, financial abuse can really be multifaceted and bidirectional as well. It can be financial abuse of someone else using your resources and having you pay their bills and asking you for money. But it can also be restricting your access to money, restricting your access to a bank account, starting out the relationship by saying, don't worry, baby, I've got it. You can move in with me. I've got the rent. I've got our bills. I'm just so excited to be with you. Don't worry about anything. And then the other forms of violence within that dyad escalate, and that economic inequity undergirding the living situation becomes high risk because that person can no longer leave. Maybe they've been told, don't worry about I know that you wanted to get this job, but you're just getting back on your feet. You have these creative projects you want to work on or focus on. Why don't you just do that and I'll take care of the living expenses? And it can sound really generous and lovely until the other forms of violence in that relationship continue to escalate and you don't have access to this person's bank account. You're not able to generate the kind of savings or income you would need in order to leave. So that's a form of financial abuse. And the other being, can you pay my bills? Can you cover? And then if you can't do it or are unable to do it, I thought you were going to be a supportive partner. What's wrong with you that you're not able to meet my needs? And even being queer people have been through so much, bisexual people have been through so much. I really thought you would understand suffering, you're supposed to be there for me. Which on its face can seem like a valid thing to say. And then if the purpose of it is to garner access to your resources, it stops being so, I thought we could just empathize, baby, And then at the same time that financial abuse is happening, potentially, emotional abuse can rely upon anti-bisexual stigma. It can be stereotyping partners as selfish or promiscuous or unstable or attention seekers or illegitimate members of the community. You see a lot of this in conversations about romantic relationships between bisexual and lesbian women, where lesbian women are basically I am your legitimacy. You're dating me, a woman. I am your access to real queer community, which is a community of lesbians. And if you leave, then basically none of these people are going to take your queerness seriously anymore. And if you leave me and God forbid end up with a man, it's no one will associate with you anymore. And it's painful to say this because I don't also want to put any stigma on lesbians. There are many lesbians who are very, very supportive of their bi partners. There are many lesbians who are really, really loving toward bi women and protective of us. And we love you and we're grateful. And I'm sorry. But also I have heard the other side of the coin, which is anti-bisexual stigma in sapphic relationships can be very loud. And once you hear those things over and over of you're selfish, promiscuous, unstable, attention-seeking, illegitimate, etc., start to believe that about yourself, which can affect how you interpret the abuse. It can affect whether you take yourself being abused seriously. Because if you think I'm just the kind of person who deserves bad things to happen to them, I'm just the kind of person that, it's hard to love or it's hard to take care of or it's hard to be with, you might start to think, well, maybe I am really bringing this upon myself. Maybe I did cause this. This is just what happens when you're bi. I don't deserve to feel better. No one else will ever love me. And that makes it much, much harder to go, even if you have the resources lined up and you're not facing that economic abuse. So It's messy. It's messy and challenging.
I gotta go. I can't. I gotta crawl out of this closet.
Yeah. I'm like sweating right now talking about this. I'm like, oh, yeah.
And it's one of the main reasons, or one of the key reasons, that we need to talk about IPV in queer relationships specifically, and how it specifically affects bi plus people, because otherwise the only template, the only frame of reference in our minds is a very cis-het coded kind of violence that then can actively work against us trying to identify what violence we are experiencing. Maybe it's not violence because I'm privileged, or maybe it's not violence because bi plus people have privilege. Again, cue the eye rolls, friends.
Yeah.
And how crucial it is for us to have alternate or more complete understandings of what does it look like when a friend, when I myself, me witnessing things happening that actually does look like violence, so I can say, that's violent, actually. That is not okay. Let's figure out a strategy. Which leads us to our next question. What do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions that folks have around intimate partner violence in queer relationships?
Okay, well, I want to address two of the things that you said. The idea of bisexual privilege and the idea of bisexual people being like these, there's like a victim complex that's projected onto us, particularly by other queer people. One, if bisexual people had the bi privilege that everyone always talks about, we wouldn't have the highest rates of IPV, sexual violence, PTSD, depression, anxiety, feelings of lack of community belongingness, fewer resources, worse social reactions when we disclose experiences of violence, fewer institutional supports designed to actually give us what we need in the aftermath of violence. Like, bi privilege does not exist. And the idea that I keep hearing when people talk about it is, basically when the fascists come, when the Nazis come, and they decide to kill all the queers again, bisexual people who are in straight passing relationships are going to hide behind their partners and leave the rest of us to die. Like, that's really what it comes down to, is bisexual people's relative invisibility only in the case that they are in straight passing relationships, which is not all bi relationships and is a horrible stereotype to have about bi people of, I think this part of our community would abandon us entirely to a death squad. If you dig down and dig down and dig down and dig down to the privilege conversation, that's where it lands over and over again. It's like, you're privileged because people don't see you and actively want to kill or harm you. It's like, then how come I'm being harmed over and over again in intimate relationships? How come I'm being harmed by friends, by the people I'm supposed to trust the most, by fellow members of the queer community? So that's the response I have to the idea of bisexual privilege. And then those same people will say, bi people just have a victim complex. Like, why are you constantly victimizing yourselves? And it's like, look at the data.
I'm being victimized.
Yes, look at the data on who is most likely to be victimized and who is less likely to be helped and least likely to receive services. Like, it's bisexual people. And I'm talking about a sexual orientation group right now. I'm not talking about a gender identity. Like, trans women are at equivalent risk to bi people for violence across the board, if not greater, particularly trans women of color. I want to name that, but that is a gender identity and racialized gender identity, not a sexual orientation. So when I hear the bi privilege piece come up, or the, why are you always just perpetual victims? First, it makes me want to tear my hair out, and then I respond with, with some of the data. And in terms of how IPV might function or look differently in queer relationships, I'll stick to the bi experience. A partner might identify jealousy or share that they're jealous by saying, how can I trust you? How can I believe that you're going to be committed to me when you're attracted to everyone? Which is that sort of anti-bisexual stigma of our inability to be monogamous. Someone who assaults or harms a bi person might say, you're a freak. You're into this kind of thing. Like, bi people are freaky. This was probably fun for you, especially if kink or BDSM dynamics are brought into that experience or that realm. And a survivor who's trying to disclose might hear things like, you're bi, like maybe you sent mixed signals. You always flirt with everyone. You like attention. You're so sensitive. And so when bisexual people are treated by society like we are sexually fallible or promiscuous and untrustworthy, It creates a cultural script that normalizes coercion and violence and complicates the disclosure process. Bisexual people actually disclose their violence experiences on average way more often than either lesbian or heterosexual people. I'm writing a research paper on this right now. Plurisexual people, bi, pan, queer, are way more likely to talk about their experiences of sexual violence to a greater number of people on average and to different types of targets. So friends and significant others and parents and religious leaders and. They'll find resource after resource. They're less likely to receive supportive reactions, and they are more likely to receive blaming and negative reactions. So there's a disclosure burden that is also heaped onto bi people where we're trying to find support. We're trying to recover. We're doing that bisexual resiliency thing where it's like, okay, this avenue didn't work, I'll try another one. This avenue didn't work, I'll try another one. And we're just not receiving access to the kinds of care or treatment that we would need to facilitate recovery, which then actively instead impedes recovery, makes that recovery timeline longer. And the longer we're symptomatic in the aftermath of a violence experience, the more vulnerable we are to re-victimization. So that's more, I guess, a commentary on cyclic violence. But the types of violence that occur in queer relationships and against bisexual people are really different. I mean, I talked a bit at the outset about threats of outing. That is a really common form of intimate partner violence that can be weaponized against queer people, but not straight people. It can also look like someone saying that your bisexuality is fake and forcing you to prove that you're queer by, having you do things over and over and over again that align with their idea of queerness. As I said before, using jealousy to control social connections. Queer people tend to date in networks. Queer networks tend to be small, especially say you're in a rural community. Say you're in a small town. You're not benefiting from urbanicity, right? There are a dozen queer people in your town that you know of, and everyone's trying to date and be loved and be in relationships. And so, yes, the people in your friend group are also your exes because, hey, there are a dozen of you.
Yep.
It becomes really easy for a partner who is possessive or controlling or jealous to whittle down that friend group by saying, I just don't like it when people are friends with their exes.
Ooh.
But that takes on a different quality for rural queer people.
Yeah.
There are layers to this.
Wow.
And as layered as it is, something that we have come across is that a very consistent factor in IPV instances is isolation of the victim and how frustrating that can be precisely when it comes to this layered rural aspect that you're mentioning. Are there some common signs that we should be vigilant of when it comes to this sort of isolation by a perpetrator?
I mean, I think some of the wisdom of supporting people who are in IPV experiences across the board, whether they're queer or not, really do apply in this situation where if you suspect that a friend of yours is being harmed or mistreated by their partner, being present for that person, even when it is difficult for you, is vital. There are a lot of people who step back from friendships and say, like, I just couldn't watch them be hurt anymore. And I hear that. It is very painful. I recommend seeking your own support, like a therapist or another trusted person in community, so that you can offload or talk to someone after giving support to someone who's in an active IPV situation. But people who are working up the courage to leave need to know that there are folks who are actually going to be there when that happens. It takes IPV survivors on average 7 attempts to leave a relationship. And often those attempts are practice of like, how will it go if I leave this way? Do I actually have the resources to leave if I leave this way? Will this living situation that's new work out for me? And so we can think about those attempts not as failures, but as practice. Like that is more information seeking of how do I leave in a way that's actually going to work? And it is very hard to leave a violent partner who has worn down your self-esteem, who knows which emotional buttons to push, who knows how to threaten you with money, children, pets, etc., who has you thinking that maybe you deserve to experience bad things, who is perhaps in control of substances if they have gotten you engaged in some substance dependence. Like there are so many layers to leaving violent relationships. And so I would say maintaining contact with the person who's in the relationship and talking with them about anything. It doesn't have to be the relationship. It can be, I'm watching this TV show. Do you want to be my like TV buddy? And we watch this show together. Or I'm going to text you once a month a picture of a cute animal I saw over the last month. I just want you to know that like I care about you. I'm a little worried and I'm not going anywhere. Like this is going to be my regular check-in. Mm-hmm. That can also be a way to establish bounds around what you're capable of giving, right? I understand people say like, it's a lot of emotional labor. And it is some emotional labor. But if you say to someone, I am going to send you a picture of a cute animal once a week, that's my check-in. Let me know that you're safe. Like, let me know how you're doing. That's relatively bounded emotional labor, a cute animal picture once a week.
Yeah.
And here, I think the implication of our current conversation is that these relationships have gotten really, really quite violent, as opposed to like showing early signs of coercion or I don't really like how that person talked to you. And so I think oftentimes what IPV eats away at, and there's plenty of literature undergirding this, is self-esteem and feelings of deservingness. And so if you can tap into that person's self-esteem of like, I love you so much and would not talk to you that way. And you deserve to be spoken to in nicer ways by the people who love you. How do you feel about the fact that your partner is speaking to you like this? That can also be helpful and at least a direction for folks to go in. That said, I work in disclosure research. One of the things that folks often want to do is like take control of survivors' decision-making by making them leave a perpetrator, by making them report someone to police, by making them do something. And what is happening if someone is in an intimate partner violence or sexual violence context is they are constantly having their agency taken away from them. They are constantly having their control taken away from them. And so one of the most empowering things we can do for those folks is reassert their agency and say, this decision is actually up to you. If you leave, how you leave, the kinds of support you want, when you leave, etc., that's up to you. If you report is up to you. I can be here in XYZ ways, and also the way I am here for you is up to you. And that reassertion of agency can be a good reminder that in other contexts, they do have power and control. And it feels nice to have power and control.
Yeah, the thing I'm hearing you say around giving people their own agency reminds me, it's like, Bailey, you're not always right about a particular situation, because I've certainly been the person that, I'm a very solutions-oriented individual, and I haven't always been the best person someone to go to at this. I'm like, well, let's fix it right now. When what you're saying is like, someone leaving their partner is a very, very long process. It takes a lot of internalized work, and I'm just like, okay, ask questions, be curious. And I also want to say to folks, like, if you check out on someone because they are in a bad situation, you are reconfirming their inner thought that they're not worth staying around for. For you to stay with your friend and be like, I'm here for as many times as it takes. I'm here to send you that photo. I'm here to watch a TV show with you because you're worth my time, because friendship is about effort, because, I'm here for whatever you need. That's how to be a friend. So like, don't look away, because when you do, bad things happen in darkness. And to flip it towards the individual, like say, I'm the person who's in the situation. We want to talk about taking steps to prioritize our own individual safety. What are some initial steps that, I could take if I'm like, oh, I think it's time to go? Like, what are my next steps?
I love a crisis line. I love a crisis line. I love a crisis line 10,000 times. Often they have websites and also text lines. The websites will have like auto escape buttons that will display where it's like, if you press Control T, this website will transform into, and it'll be something really neutral or something really benign. So if someone looks at your screen, all of a sudden it looks like something different. But if you are trying to plan a way to leave, there are safety planning templates that you can find on domestic violence and intimate partner violence websites that take you through the different considerations you might need. There are also text lines that are 24/7 where you could reach out to someone and say, hey, I'm trying to like strategize how to get out of this relationship that isn't working for me. And they can take you through safety planning. But also those are resources for people who will just listen. And so oftentimes people don't go to their friends because they don't want to be a burden. They don't want to put stress on their friends. The world is tough right now and everyone's going through a hard time. And why would they want to listen to me? Blah, blah, blah. Crisis line is not that. Like that person is there to listen to you. You can text them for 3 hours and they'll make sure that you're safe and they'll hear the story of whatever your partner did or said to you most recently. I hope those crisis line volunteers have training on how to support bisexual people. The lack of training that's like bi or queer specific makes those resources a little bit less tailored, but that would be a resource I would direct people to immediately. I mean, if you have a phone, if you have access to a phone that a partner can't see, a text line is incredibly valuable. You can save their numbers. They're a few little taps away. And then in terms of other resourcing, obviously having like a social support network is valuable. Family, friends, and loved ones that you can lean on as you're trying to make this decision. Trying to have, it feels so silly to say this, like try to have your economic ducks in a row. But like obviously, and also it's very, very hard to do that for a lot of people. So, great if you can do that. Otherwise, hopefully there are resources in your town or city like shelter spaces or home spaces where you can have temporary living. Mm-hmm. There's often like gap living if people were previously co-residing with an abusive partner. They used to be called like battered women's shelters. A lot of them are now called like crisis shelters.
Good rebrand.
Yeah, good rebrand. Really strange identity to like impose upon people. But I would say those would be plans for leaving. And then a setup plan for your health afterwards. If you are insured, going to a qualified therapist. If you are uninsured and can afford it, going to a qualified therapist. But also finding spaces in your community that do group therapy, trauma-informed yoga. Oftentimes those classes are priced lower, and it can be really important to experience some safe embodiment after experiences of chronic violence and violation of how does it feel to be in my body in a space where I actually feel safe and comfortable and no one can touch me without my permission and I get to move freely. That can be really a helpful resource for folks. But even what I am finding as I'm speaking right now is the resources are broad and networked. Like, I don't think it's sufficient to have one of these. It's great to have one of these. But if you have the capacity to build up or at least look into multiple of these, the more supported and less alone you're going to feel and the better equipped you will be to leave. And I will say too, people set really arbitrary rules for themselves when they're in intimate partner violence situations of once they do this, I'll leave. I'll know it's time to leave when they do this. And maybe that this never happens and a whole bunch of horrible things around it do, but that one thing doesn't happen. And so it's like an arbitrary rule that's never broken. Or once that thing does happen, it's like, oh, well, coping with that wasn't as bad as I expected. The new goalpost is this. And so a question that I'll ask for my loved ones who are in challenging situations is, what would it take? Like, what is the goalpost? What is your, like, I'm done? And no judgment, whatever it is, just what is it? And then if that thing does happen, and they do tell me, because sometimes those things will happen, and then folks will decide not to disclose because they'll know they shared that was their goalpost. If they do share, saying like, I just want to know that we did talk about this and you said this was your goalpost, and I'm not going to make you do anything. This is not up to me, but past you had this goalpost in mind. And I know when I was in a relationship that was pretty scary, I set a goalpost and it happened and I left. But I was 19. I was quite young. I didn't have another decade plus of bi negativity messaging or victim blame or whatever burdening me from leaving. I was like relatively free to go and well-resourced. So I don't want to project that experience of leaving onto other people, but notice what the goalposts are for yourself and for that other person and bring them up again, like check in on them again.
I really like that language.
Yeah. As I hear you talk about this, I am wondering about the reactions from fellow queer people or queer institutions and what happens after we disclose. Do you have any tips on how do we respond if we are disbelieved by queer folks or queer institutions once we share what's going on?
Katie said womp.
I mean, yes, like I have so many thoughts on this. I will say there's no one size fits all because someone could give you a response that is disbelieving or like a little bit dubious, and then also be the person who follows up with you in a week and says, hey, how are you doing with this? Like, I'm still thinking about it. And you don't know necessarily from a single interaction with someone if they've decided you're like a disgusting fake abuse liar or if they just didn't know what to say in the moment. Like, you don't actually know. And there are often responses to disclosure that people know are bad, like disbelief and blame. That didn't happen. What were you wearing? He's never treated me like this. Like, people know not to say those. But then there are things that are well-intended, but nevertheless harmful, like egocentrism of, oh my God, I'm so devastated. I'm going to go beat them up. Like, making it so about you and your reaction and your feelings that then the survivor has to take care of you. There's the control taking piece of like, well, now you have to do this. Like, obviously you have to leave them. Obviously you have to do blah, blah, blah. Like, that takes their agency away. They've already had their agency taken away. There's infantilizing of like acting like they can't take care of themselves anymore. Like, you put yourself in this situation and now I'm going to chaperone you every time we go to a club. Like, I'm going to check how much you're drinking, and like really condescending to the person who's experienced violence is often taken not well. And then there are the really helpful reactions like listening, providing emotional support, providing tangible aid of like, do you need a place to stay? Do you need a ride to a hospital to get an evidence collection kit done? Do you need a couch to crash on? Do you need someone to watch your pet? Whatever. And informational aid of, this is actually really common. This is actually really common for queer people. This is actually really common for bisexual women in specific. Like, you are not alone. This has nothing to do with like who you are as a person and your like fundamental worthiness or deservingness, and providing more data of like, here are some things that might be helpful. Here are some things that other people find helpful. That can all be great. But if you disclose to someone and their initial response is shitty, you absolutely have the right to seek other disclosure recipients, to talk to other people, to find your other friends. Like, if you have a best friend and you thought they would respond so well and then they just don't, it's not like you owe that friend some kind of loyalty where it's like, no, they were going to be my support person for this. They've demonstrated they can't do that for whatever reason. You have the freedom to find someone else. There are other people who are ready, willing, and able to support you. But you also deserve to know, I think, as a survivor, how common shitty reactions are. It has nothing to do with you. People just don't know how to respond to disclosures of violence. It hasn't been taught in school curricula. It hasn't been taught in health education classes. It's barely even being taught at the college level of like, what do you say when someone discloses to you? So people think that things like infantilization of like, I'm going to take care of you now, are helpful. And they don't know that survivors don't experience them as helpful. They think that taking control of that person's decision-making is helpful and is going to keep them safe. And they don't know that they're not experienced as helpful. And so when I wound up sharing with my family, and they were not very supportive, I found all of the research and writing by Sarah Ullman, who wrote and psychometrically tested the social reactions questionnaire and has basically spent her career figuring out what kind of social reactions are beneficial to survivors and what kinds are detrimental. And I shared that literature with my very academic family. And I said, did you see? You all did this stuff over here in column A, which Sarah Ullman tells you not to do based on her decades of study. I need you to do this stuff over here in column B. Now you are better equipped to have conversations with me about this. And it took a lot of labor, but that was the kind of language that my very academic family could understand. And so to the survivors who are listening, who have disclosed IPV or SV histories and have gotten shitty reactions, baby, I promise that has nothing to do with you. People, even people who love you so much, don't know what to say. They do not have the skills no one ever taught them. Occasionally, you're going to be put in the position of teaching other people what you need. It is okay to say, I'm going to tell you something. This is what I'm going to need from you. This is what I really don't want to hear from you. Can you do that? And if they say yes, great, you've established some parameters. And if they say no, low-key F that person, sorry. You can find someone else.
High key.
Yeah, like, if you're like, I need you not to respond this way. And they're like, well, I'm going to respond this way. Then perhaps that's not your support person. But people broadly don't know how to do this. And I think we also need to cut each other some slack for like the ways that our sex ed system, that our activist and justice systems have failed to teach us these things. Like, this is not one individual person's failure of knowing how to respond when someone discloses violence. This is a lesson we were not collectively taught. And so I know that disclosing to someone who isn't sure how to respond can be painful. It also has nothing to do with you and often has little to do with them. And they could use this information, and perhaps you could also use this information.
Yeah. Thank you. This has been such a great conversation in terms of, things to think about in science and literature. And we eat that shit up. We love it. The thing we'd like to do for all of our episodes is to give our listeners homework so they can be better bisexual killjoys. And we'd like your insight. What are some ways that our fellow bisexual killjoys can spread awareness about specifically bi plus IPV?
I would say read this amazing article by Johnson and Grove if you can, 2017. And the article is called Why Us? I'll have it linked in the show notes, Bailey and Jace, if you're cool doing that.
Oh, yeah.
But it really helps clarify why bisexual people are at such heightened risk. And it will give you talking points. It will give you data to share that explains, why is this happening to us? And over again. And I would say, too, looking up the social reactions questionnaire by Sarah Ullman, though the questionnaire really isn't going to help you. I've done some summaries. I'm trying to think of what the best way is to share this. Like, I have slide decks that I've given to college students of how to provide supportive responses to sexual violence disclosures. Like, this is one of my areas of expertise of what do people most commonly say? How do negative reactions affect survivors? So I'm happy to share that slide deck.
Please.
And then I also have a little side hobby podcast called Think Thirsty, a podcast for smart sluts. And I think the How to Respond to Disclosures episode is like episode 3 or 4. And that distills that slide deck down to like a 20 or 30 minute conversation. So that's also a resource.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. That's what I would say.
Very cool.
Katie, this has been such an informative and comprehensive conversation around intimate partner violence, disclosures, how to react to them, how to raise awareness about them, how to literally slap your parents in the face with some references, Like, I'm partial to that one. And trust me, we eat it all up. All of the facts, all of the data. It has been interesting, to say the least. We have a very full reference list for all of you listening in. This is something that we need to talk about more. We need more references for, and we cannot shy away from it simply because it is an uncomfortable conversation. This is about people's livelihood, their self-esteem, and we can attest that every bi plus person deserves to feel worthy and amazing and like hot shit, because you are.
You are.
On that note, Katie, what should we be on the lookout next from you?
I will say I just came out with my debut novel. It's called Queering Him. It is a very steamy book about 2 incredibly imperfect and mutually harmful bisexual people falling in love and having a kinky, challenging relationship. It shows the ways that bi negativity and internalized biphobia and anti-bisexual stigma impact adolescent relationships for the worse. Like, if you are carrying around bi negativity in your body, how does it make you treat other people? How does it make you conceptualize other people's queerness? And so if you're interested in a very imperfect presentation of messy, difficult, sexy, nuanced bi characters, please read Queering Him. Otherwise, you can follow my work on Google Scholar. I'm also on social media at k.w.bogen, Instagram, Threads, TikTok. I have 2 podcasts, Super Humanizer and Think Thirsty, a podcast for smart sluts. And yeah, I'm really excited to stay in touch with you all. I have like an 80% answer rate to my DMs. I answer most of my DMs within 4 hours. So if something about this episode stuck out to you and you want to chat about it, reach out to me and I'm happy to have a conversation.
Thank you again for joining us, Katie, and thank you for embodying the bisexual killjoy spirit and all the work that you do. It's been awesome.
Thanks so much for y'all's time. I really appreciate getting to know you.
Thank you for tuning into Bisexual Killjoy, where we know that bisexuality isn't a phase, it's a phenomenon. To support us, share us with your friends, subscribe to our Substack, rate our podcast, preferably 5 stars, wherever you're listening to us right now. As always, we want to hear from you. We'd love to answer your questions in our advice column, Give It To Me Bi Plus. Support us on our Patreon to keep the work going and get access to our community Discord. And until we meet again, keep being a bisexual killjoy.
Stay bisexual and stay strong.